Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Simply Awake. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think the major goals of becoming an effective and awake human being are. In other words, how do we get there? What do we do to become effective humans and to wake up to our spiritual nature? So, I think, as I was alluding to in a previous video, the first thing that we really need to do is eliminate unnecessary suffering. So much of our lives are full of unnecessary suffering. We believe fretful and worrisome thoughts about the future, about ourselves, about other people, what they're saying, thinking, and doing when they're not with us. We generate a lot of emotion from these false thoughts. And these emotions and thoughts really tie us up into a lot of unnecessary suffering. So we're also very used to feeling emotionally neglected, and often we don't even have any awareness of our own emotions. I used to think it was just men. Men were only allowed to feel excited, angry, happy, or lustful. No melancholy, no sadness, no anxiety. And even anger is not so acceptable these days. If you're angry, you're seen as kind of an a-hole, right? So to start using bad language on my channel. Okay. So in terms of our emotional lives, we need to get acquainted with our emotions so that we can figure out what of them are necessary and what of them are unnecessary. Because a lot of the emotion that we have, that sort of dark or difficult emotion, is really another source of unnecessary suffering. So eliminating any unnecessary suffering is really an important thing if we want to have the bandwidth to be relatively stable human beings. I don't always want to be reacting to everything that everybody says or any news headline that I read, because a lot of them are just plain propaganda, right? I want to really sort of try to approach life with some calm and some perspective. And if I'm embroiled in a lot of unnecessary suffering, I can't do that. So one of the things that I try to do with people is to teach them how to eliminate as much of that unnecessary suffering as possible. Then the next thing to be an effective human being is that we need to learn that there's a difference between the I that we think of as, hey, this is the chattering voice in my head, and that's what I call me. This thought voice in my head that seems to chatter all the time, that's what I am. That's what the me is. That's who I am. And actually, you kind of already know that's not true if you've had a nice quiet moment at the beach, and then suddenly a thought interrupts, and you're like, oh, wait, if I'm my thoughts, what's listening to my thoughts? Right? So we begin to notice that there's something, we call it awareness in the beginning, or consciousness, that's registering every sensory experience that we have and all the thoughts that we have. And in the mystical traditions, they call this awareness or consciousness. And so when we're trying to become more effective human beings, we want to understand that we're not just the thoughts, because if we're just the thoughts, then they define in very rapid and changing terms what we are. And there isn't a lot of stability in thought, and thought is often false, and falsehoods don't tend to make us feel very good. So when we discover that there's this faculty that we might call awareness, awareness is just sort of like an empty field. Sort of like if you think of a baseball diamond, the field of awareness is like the baseball diamond. And the emotions and sensations and thoughts that we have are like the players playing on the baseball field. But when the emotions and sensations and thoughts disappear off the field is still intact and it's still pristine. It really hasn't been adversely affected by thoughts, feelings, or sensations. It's always registering them all the time, kind of in an uncomplaining fashion. So discovering awareness is the second of the four principles that we want to use to become effective humans and potentially to wake up to enlightenment or liberation. Now, one of the ways that we begin to separate our identity from thought is called mindfulness, but really it means living in present moment awareness. And that really means, oh, feeling all of the sensations that are giving me information all the time, right? So there's all this sensation going on when you're listening to this video and watching it. You're hearing my voice, you're seeing my image on the screen. In the background, there may be noises in the room that you're sitting in. You may feel yourself, the pressure of your butt on the chair, your feet on the floor. You may be drinking a cup of coffee or, I don't know, smoking a cigarette for all I know. I grew up in an age where a lot of people did that. And so all that's going on all at the same time, and all this information is coming in. That's what we would call sensory information. But what you're paying attention to is just thought, 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 thought. So what we try to do to make you more aware of how vast a being you are is to begin to help you move attention away from thought, which generates mostly on the left side of the brain, and into a wide field of awareness where you're now aware of all the sensory information that's sort of streaming in all the time. Sense of taste, touch, smell, sight, sound, even sense of proprioception, and the vestibular sense, which I've covered in another video. And so when we're paying attention to that kind of stuff, we're much more interwoven kind of with reality, and we're much more staying in the present moment because time is really just a mental construct. We can't actually experience a moment in the past or a moment in the future with our senses. We can only experience this eternal now with our senses. So living in present moment awareness is another important part of the process of getting psychologically balanced and waking up. And last in the sort of program, if you're willing to go this far, and some people aren't, and blessings on you, whatever your path is. I'm not here to convert you to becoming enlightened or liberated. It's not really the point. That's up to you. But what can happen as you begin to separate your awareness from your thoughts is you begin to question whether your sense of identity really is just from words in your head about a self, or whether you're actually more that sort of vast awareness that's receiving all that sensory information as well as listening to the thoughts. When you start to do that, when you start to separate from thought and notice that you're this awareness that's registering everything that's arising, then you can begin to shift your sense of identity or gravity from the language generating voice, the chattering mind, what we sometimes call the ego, to this much greater sense of awareness. And awareness is, yes, it's another concept, it's another idea, but it's a great way to begin to describe all the parts of you that you're ignoring that are interfacing and intertwined with sensory experience all the time, and which you're mostly missing because you're living in your head. And the thing is, if you can do those four things, if you can eliminate unnecessary suffering, if you can discover awareness, if you can start to practice feeling all of your senses as they arise, in other words, living in present moment awareness, then you may be able to shift your sense of identity or gravity from the chattering thoughts in your head or ego to this sort of vast sense of awareness. And when you do that, that's what we call spiritual awakening. And it isn't the end of the process, it's the beginning of a whole different process. But it's such a major shift in life that you'll feel like an entirely different kind of a human being when that happens. And so I'm going to leave you with that. That's another sort of overview of what I like to do with clients that I'm working with and with these videos on Simply Awake. And again, you'll note that these are not professionally made, or they're a little bit edited by a friend of mine, but this is just me talking to you because I'm a human being. I'm almost 70 years old. I've lived through some really horrific experiences like sexual abuse as a child and young person, and um, intense bullying at school, and 7 years in a religious cult, and even time in a mental institution in my early 20s, which is almost 50 years ago. I'm almost 70 years old. So I want to tell you that somebody who starts out with this kind of horrendous experience and who lived in a kind of intensive suffering and anxiety from the first half of my life, that I've been able to use these principles with myself, and there goes the clock again, and with others. And I'm here to say that you too can transform your life with the principles that I'm teaching. And it doesn't take forever, and it's not costly, and you don't have to listen to anything anybody says, including me. You just have to start experimenting. So there you go. Have a lovely day. Hope you're enjoying something of your life right now and tuning more into awareness and less into thought. Many blessings. Take care.